Welcome to Wonderland Unlocked. I'm Courtney, a certified peer support specialist, and this is Series 2, Through the Rabbit Hole, the beginning of self-discovery. I've fallen down my own rabbit hole, questioning everything along the way. Now, I'm here to support you as you explore the unknown, challenge what you believe, and uncover who you really are. Take a deep breath. The rabbit hole is waiting. Let's unlock Wonderland together.
Alice, sweetheart, it's time for tea. Alice. Alice.
Today's episode is one that I've been wanting to explore for a while now. Pieces of me, understanding the many sides of yourself. You see, for the longest time, I felt like I was a collection of broken, disconnected pieces, instead of one whole person. I felt like I was constantly slipping between different versions of myself, shifting depending on the situation and who I was with. It felt like I was trying to put together a puzzle where none of the pieces seemed to fit. And honestly, it was exhausting. But now, looking back, I realized I wasn't just adapting to circumstances. I was hiding. I was fragmenting. Each side of me tucked away, hidden behind a mask for fear of being rejected or misunderstood. I tried to be what I thought others expected of me, rather than figuring out who I truly was. Sound familiar? It's like when Alice first steps into Wonderland. Everything is strange and confusing, and she doesn't quite know who she is. In her journey, she encounters versions of herself that seem to shift, just as I did, unsure of her place in this new world. But what if, like Alice, we're meant to embrace those different pieces of ourselves? What if those shifting identities aren't a sign of weakness or failure, but of growth and self-discovery? I know it can feel like you're at the mercy of the confusion, just as Alice was, but I've learned that these many sides of ourselves are not a problem to solve. They're a reflection of our complexity, our humanity. We are more than just one version of ourselves. We are many things, all coming together to form a whole. So, if you've ever felt like you're slipping between identities, unsure of which one is the real you, this episode's for you. I'm going to be deep diving into the psychology behind why this happens and why it's rooted in our past experiences. And most importantly, how we can stop fighting ourselves and start embracing the many sides of who we are. Just like Alice's journey through Wonderland, it's all about discovering who you really are by looking at the pieces that make up the whole. Let's go down the rabbit hole together and start piecing ourselves back together. When we start the journey of self-discovery, one of the first questions we ask ourselves is, who am I, really? For me, this was one of the most perplexing and unsettling questions I had to face. I spent so much time trying to figure out who I was, only to feel like I was endlessly chasing a version of myself that I could never quite catch. Psychologists have a term for this: self-concept clarity. It refers to how well we understand who we are at our core. When our self-concept clarity is low, we feel like we're constantly lost, indecisive, or even like we're shape-shifting, morphing into different versions of ourselves depending on the situation. The confusion we feel can make us feel like we're stuck in a game of dress-up, trying on different identities to see which one fits, only to realize none of them quite feel like us. It's like Alice when she first tumbles down the rabbit hole. She enters this stage, bewildering world, and suddenly she's asked to become someone she's not sure she recognizes. She's constantly asked, "Who are you?" But the more she tries to define herself, the more she seems to change. One minute, she's tall. The next, she's small. Every time she tries to grasp her identity, it slips further away. Her identity mirrors our own struggle with self-concept clarity, as we shift between who we think we are and who we actually are beneath the surface. This feeling of confusion doesn't happen in a vacuum. It's often a result of things we've experienced, especially from childhood. If we grow up in an environment where we're constantly told who we should be or where we feel the need to adapt to the expectations of others, it's no wonder we feel like we're slipping through the cracks of our own identity. Trauma and social pressures, both subtle and overt, teach us to mold ourselves into different versions for different people. Over time, those versions can become fragmented, leaving us unsure of who we really are when we're alone with ourselves. When we don't have self-concept clarity, we're like Alice in Wonderland, lost in searching for a sense of stability in a world that's constantly changing. We become so focused on trying to fit the expectations around us that we forget to ask the most important question: who am I when I'm not trying to be someone else? In this segment, we'll explore why we get lost in this search for self, how we can find clarity, and how understanding our true selves can help us stop shifting between the fragmented identities. Just like Alice's journey, finding out who we are is less about trying to control the changes and more about embracing them, accepting that we don't need to be the one thing, but a whole collection of experiences, strengths, and contradictions. Let's dive deeper into what it really means to understand ourselves. When I was a kid, I learned early that my real self, who I truly was, wasn't always acceptable. At home, I had to be careful, quiet, and composed. Any mistake, any outburst was met with sharp words, cold disappointment, or outright dismissal. I quickly learned that my emotions were dangerous, that too much of anything, too much sadness, too much excitement, too much need would get me shut down. But then, I'd step out into the world, and the story changed. At school, I had to be the complete opposite. I had to be tough, loud, unbothered. If I showed any weakness, if I let them see how much the words and the whispers and the isolation hurt, it would only get worse. So I became a different version of myself there, sharper, one that didn't care, one who knew how to blend in just enough to avoid becoming a target. And then there were my friends, certain friends anyways, where I became something else entirely, the fixer, problem solver, the one who had it all together. Because if I could be the one helping, if I could make their lives any easier, then maybe, just maybe, no one would see how much I was falling apart inside. By the time I reached my late teens, I had no idea which version of me was real. Was I the quiet one? The sarcastic one? The one who always had the right answer? Or the one who felt like they were failing at everything? The people around me saw different things, and I didn't know if any of them were actually me, or if I had just become a collection of reactions to my environment, trying to keep everything together and fit into whatever role was expected of me at the time. It reminds me of Alice lost in Wonderland, trying to make sense of a world that just keeps changing around her. At one point, she finds herself growing and shrinking, her body shifting in size, not knowing who she's supposed to be or how she fits into this chaotic world. In many ways, that's how I felt. Like I was trying on different versions of myself depending on where I was and who I was with and what they needed from me. I could barely recognize myself anymore. One night, I remember sitting alone in my room staring at myself in the mirror, and I felt nothing. I wasn't seeing me. I was seeing a stranger. Someone whose identity depended entirely on what the room they were in and who they were with. And that terrified me. This feeling of being fractured, of being a puzzle made up of pieces that didn't quite fit together, is something I think we all experience at some point. Just like Alice, who is constantly questioning who she is in a world that keeps shifting, I too was lost in a maze of contradictions. But as I eventually learned, it's not about finding one version of yourself and sticking to it. It's about embracing all of those pieces. The quiet, the tough, the helper, the one who's struggling, and understanding that they're all part of who you are. It's about realizing you don't have to fit into any one mold or be defined by anyone else's expectations. You are a collection of all of these contradictions, and together they form the full picture of you. So if you've ever felt like you're living in contradictions, like you're wearing different masks for different people or situations, you're not alone. Just like Alice, your journey is about figuring out how all of these pieces fit together to create the unique, complex, beautiful person that you are. As we continue down this rabbit hole of self-discovery, I want to dive into a topic that often gets overlooked, but is deeply connected to our sense of self: the masks we wear. We all wear them, some of us more consciously than others, but what does it really mean to wear a mask, and why do we do it? Our brains are wired for social survival, From the moment we are born, we begin adapting to the world around us. This is an instinctual survival mechanism. It helps us fit into social groups and avoid rejection and build connections. But somewhere along the way, this adaptation can go from being a healthy coping mechanism to something that erodes our authenticity. We start to wear masks to become someone we think we need to be to survive in different environments, to protect ourselves from judgment and to meet the expectations of those around us. And the more we wear these masks, the harder it becomes to know who we are underneath them. Masking is especially common in neurodivergent individuals, trauma survivors, and those who grew up in unstable or high expectation environments. I can't help but think of Alice constantly having to adjust to the bizarre, ever-changing world of Wonderland. She's forced to change her behavior, her identity, her reactions. It's like she's trying on different masks, unsure of who she is or how to navigate a world that keeps shifting under her feet. For people like Alice, and for those of us who's experienced trauma or grew up in environments where we had to adapt to survive, masking becomes second nature. It's like putting on a different outfit for every occasion. At home, I was quiet and composed, safe but not truly myself. At school, I wore the masks of toughness, unbothered, indifference, so I wouldn't be a target. And around friends, I was the fixer, the one who had it all together, always putting others' needs before mine so no one would see how much I was falling apart. In all of these situations, I wasn't showing the real me. I was showing a version of myself that I thought would be accepted or loved, or that would help me survive. But the problem with wearing these masks is that over time we forget what it feels like to be without them. We forget who we are underneath it all. When Alice finds herself at the tea party with the Mad Hatter and the March Hare, everyone is talking and acting in bizarre ways. But she's trying so hard to fit in and keep up that she loses herself in the madness. She forgets, at her core, she's just Alice, someone who doesn't have to wear a mask to belong. But in Wonderland, where nothing stays the same, how can she remember who she is? For me, and maybe for you, wearing these masks can become exhausting. The more I masked, the less I knew about who I truly was. I wasn't aware of the deep toll it was taking until I found myself at a breaking point, where all the masks I had worn over the years started to feel suffocating. The persona of the tough one, the helper, the quiet one, they all felt hollow. The more I tried to keep them in place, the more I felt like I was losing touch with my own identity. And here's the thing. Masking doesn't just hide our true selves from the world, it hides our true selves from us too. We become so good at adapting to others' expectations that we forget to check in with ourselves. It's like walking around in Wonderland with no clear sense of who we are or what we stand for, just reacting to what's in front of us. I want us to acknowledge that masking is a defense mechanism, born from a need to survive in a world that feels unpredictable or unsafe. But we don't have to live behind these masks forever. Just like Alice, who slowly starts to understand that she doesn't have to fit into the roles Wonderland forces on her, we too can begin to shed these masks. We can start to question the personas we've created and ask, what is truly mine? What parts of me are hiding beneath the masks I've worn for so long? Because when we take off those masks, when we stop pretending to be what others need us to be, we can finally start to discover who we really are. It's a painful process, I won't lie, but just like Alice's journey through Wonderland, it's also a journey of self-discovery, where the strange, the new, and the unfamiliar becomes parts of who we are. Pieces of the puzzle that, when we put together, show us the full, authentic picture of ourselves. Let's talk about how we can start taking off those masks and reveal who we really are beneath the surface. There was a time when I didn't let anyone see the real me. I had different versions of myself for different people, and I made damn sure they never overlapped. It was like I was running an elaborate social experiment, carefully curating each version of myself to fit the space I was in. But deep down, I knew it wasn't real. I knew I was hiding. And the scariest part, I didn't even know I was hiding anymore. I remember this moment vividly. I was talking to a friend, someone I had known for years, and they just looked at me and said, "I don't think I really know you." And I laughed it off, brushed it aside. But inside, it felt like someone had cracked me open. Because they were right. And worse, I didn't even know myself. I had spent so much time being who I thought people needed me to be that I had no idea who I was without them. The act of masking, of constantly shifting and curating ourselves to fit the expectations of others, comes at a high price, and that price is paid, often unknowingly, through exhaustion, loneliness, and disassociation. Let's start with exhaustion. Have you ever felt completely drained after a social interaction, not because it was physically taxing, but because you had to keep up an act? Curating yourself for different people, different situations, it takes a lot of mental and emotional energy. It's like you're always performing, always trying to be something or someone you think others will accept. In Wonderland, Alice is constantly adjusting to the chaos around her, trying to understand who she is in a world that seems to demand she change at every turn. She grows and shrinks, she faces characters who tell her contradictory things, and she forces to adapt to the strange rules of Wonderland. It's exhausting. This constant shift from one version of herself to the next, trying to fit in, trying to make sense of it all. And just like Alice, when we wear masks, we're constantly in a state of flux, always adjusting, always trying to become something we think we need to be. And that exhaustion catches up with us. You start to feel like you're running on empty, like you're constantly giving but never really receiving. The mental energy it takes to curate your identity for others leaves little space for you to simply be. You find yourself drained, not from the activities or the people, but from the effort of holding up the mask you wear. And eventually that exhaustion turns into burnout, a state where you can't keep pretending anymore. But what about the loneliness? It's one thing to be surrounded by people, but it's a whole nother thing to feel like no one truly knows you. No one sees the real you. When you're constantly masking, you become a stranger to the people around you and to yourself. You can't connect deeply with anyone because on some level, you're always hiding parts of yourself. It's like Alice never truly connecting with any of the characters in Wonderland. She's in a world full of strange and fascinating creatures, and yet she feels alone because she can't find her way back to her true self. And loneliness, in this sense, is a form of isolation that goes deeper than any physical distance. It's the isolation of not being seen or understood. When we wear masks, we're protecting ourselves, but in the process, we push others away without even realizing it. We hide the most authentic parts of ourselves because we fear judgment or rejection, and by doing so, we keep people from knowing who we truly are. We may be surrounded by people, but the absence of true connection leaves us feeling alone. And then there's disassociation. This is the most insidious cost of all. Over time, when you wear masks for so long, you start to forget who you are underneath them. You start to lose track of your real emotions, desires, and needs. When Alice grows too tall and too small, she becomes disoriented. She loses touch with what's real. Similarly, when we're constantly adjusting to the expectations of others, we lose track of our true selves. Our emotions become distorted. Our desires feel unclear. We begin to feel disconnected from our own needs, as though we're living on autopilot, reacting to situations rather than responding with our authentic selves. Disassociation is a form of emotional numbness, where you separate yourself from the emotions that feel too overwhelming or confusing. And this can happen when we wear masks to protect ourselves from judgment or vulnerability. When we hide parts of ourselves so well that we forget what it feels like to express those parts openly, we disassociate from our true feelings because in the moment, it feels safer to not confront them. But this only deepens the divide between who we are and who we show the world. So what's the cost of these masks? Exhaustion from the constant performance. Loneliness because no one sees the real you. Disassociation because you lose track of who you really are. It's a heavy burden. And if we're not careful, these costs can start to compound until we're left feeling disconnected from both others and from ourselves. Just like Alice in Wonderland, we can start to lose our sense of self, and the longer we stay in this disconnected state, the harder it becomes to find our way out. But here's the good news. We don't have to live like this forever. We too can start to begin to shed our masks and reconnect with our true selves. It's a journey. It takes time. And it's not without its challenges. But the freedom that comes from being seen, truly seen, makes it all worth it. When I look back at those years of wearing masks, I could see how each side of myself felt like a carefully constructed persona, a version of me that I thought needed to fit into the world around me. There was the good daughter side of me, always trying to follow the rules, keeping everything neat and in order, trying so hard to meet everyone's expectations. And then there was the wild child version of me, acting out when I wasn't at home, trying to be noticed because in my mind, I was invisible at home. And of course, there was the perfect student, pushing myself relentlessly to perform, to be perfect, because I feared that if I didn't, I'd be rejected, abandoned. But behind each of these masks, the good daughter, the wild child, the perfect student, there was a part of me that was never seen. My true self, my real emotions were hidden behind walls I built for protection. I was terrified of being dismissed, criticized, or misunderstood. And so I locked myself away, never really allowing anyone to see who I was beyond these carefully constructed versions of me. Looking back, it was like I was living in fragments, different version of myself, compartmentalized into these separate identities to survive, each one trying to protect the others, trying to be who I thought I needed to be in different environments. But I never got the chance to be whole. I was a collection of fragments, always shifting, always adapting, but never really being. This idea of fragmented selves, the part of us that comes out in different situations, is a real thing. It's called identity fragmentation, and it often happens as a survival mechanism in response to trauma, instability, or environments that demand us to be something we're not. These fragments, these inner selves, are pieces of our psyche that emerge depending on where we are and who we're with. They serve as a purpose in helping us cope with the world around us, but they also keep us from truly understanding who we are at our core. As Alice ventures deeper into Wonderland, she undergoes all these changes in size, each transformation making her feel like a different person. One moment she's too big, the next too small, and with every shift she questions who she truly is. It's as if she's experienced her own version of identity fragmentation, constantly changing in response to her environment, never sure of what her true self actually is. And like Alice, we can find ourselves in a constant state of flux, trying to navigate the world, but never knowing who we are because we're always shifting to fit in, to survive, to be accepted. The more we fragment ourselves, the harder it becomes to truly understand who we are. We get lost in the versions of ourselves that we've created, and it's like staring in a mirror at a stranger, someone who only reflects the versions of ourselves we've chosen to show. The real, unfiltered version, the one that's not dependent on outside approval or expectations, gets buried, locked away in the depths of our subconscious. And over time, we lose track of who we even are beneath the mask we've worn for so long. I spent so many years feeling disconnected, like I was always pretending to be someone else, but I didn't know how to stop. The idea of just being me, of being whole, was terrifying because I'd never really known who that person was. It took getting lost in the madness of Wonderland, the process of self-discovery, to start understanding the truth that I wasn't just a collection of fragments. I was and am a whole person with all my complexities, contradictions, and layers. And if I was ever going to stop feeling like I was a stranger to myself, I had to start looking at all the pieces, acknowledging each part of me instead of hiding them away. This process of reintegration, of understanding the many sides of ourselves, is difficult. It's a journey that takes time. We can begin to find our way back to the center of our true selves, It's in accepting each of our pieces and seeing them as not as masks, but as part of our complete identity that we start to heal and come back to alignment. And when we do, we can finally stop feeling like we're playing different roles and start living as our whole authentic selves. When we experience trauma, whether in childhood or later in life, our identities can become fragmented. We might create different versions of ourselves to survive the emotional turbulence, versions that help us cope with situations that feel unsafe, unpredictable, or overwhelming. For example, if you were constantly told that your emotions were too much or that your needs weren't important, you might have created an emotionless version of yourself, a version that learned to suppress or ignore feelings to avoid being criticized or dismissed. Maybe this part of you became a way to survive in environments where vulnerability was seen as a weakness. And over time, the version of you that could feel and express emotions gets buried, while the emotionless mess takes its place. If you grew up in a chaotic or unpredictable environment, you may have developed the adaptable self, someone who could constantly adjust to new circumstances, but never felt stable or grounded in who they truly were. This version of yourself might have learned to adapt to survive, shifting to fit in whatever situation you are in. But in doing so, you might have lost track of who you were when no one else was watching, or when you weren't performing for others. But here's the thing. None of these parts of us are bad. They're all developed as protective mechanisms. They were the ones who helped us survive when we didn't have the tools to deal with what was happening around us. They kept us safe when we didn't know how to protect ourselves. Each part of you, even the ones that hide your emotions or adapt to every situation, has a purpose, and that purpose was survival. As Alice moves through Wonderland, she constantly shifts, struggling to understand who she is. Much like Alice, we might feel like we're never the right size or version of ourselves. We shift and change depending on the circumstances, trying to make ourselves fit in. Just like Alice's struggles, the goal isn't to discard the parts of ourselves that we've created over time. These parts, though fragmented, keep us going. The goal is to integrate them, to understand how they helped us survive, to accept them as parts of our journey, and to find a way to bring them together in a way that makes us whole. Healing is about embracing these fragmented pieces and allowing them to coexist. It's not about eliminating or shaming any parts of ourselves. Instead, it's about learning how to weave these parts together, integrating them into our sense of self so that we no longer feel like we're a collection of disconnected versions of ourselves. When Alice learns to navigate Wonderland and ultimately finds her way, it's because she accepts all the strange, wonderful things she encounters, both inside and outside herself. Similarly, as we move forward towards healing, we have to learn to accept each part of ourselves, no matter how different they seem. The adaptable self, the emotionless self, the protector. Each one plays a role in keeping us safe. And now, as we begin to heal, the work is about integrating these parts into our whole self so that we can stop feeling like different people and start embracing who we truly are in all of our complexity. I remember when I first realized that I had to stop seeing the bad parts of me as something to reject. The reckless version of me, she didn't just appear out of nowhere. She was the product of years of pushing down emotions and not knowing how to express myself. She was my way of surviving when I felt invisible or powerless. The perfectionist in me, she emerged because I needed to be perfect, to earn love, to feel validated. Every piece of me was created for a reason. And that's when the big shift happened. I started seeing myself not as broken, but as whole. In all of my fragments, I was still me. All of those versions of myself were different parts of a whole person, just different chapters of a story. Each part had a role to play. Each chapter served a purpose. It was a revelation, and one that didn't happen overnight. It took time. Time to realize that I wasn't meant to just be one thing or the other. I was meant to be all of it. Self-integration is a process. It's not about fixing anything, because nothing is inherently broken. It's about recognizing the parts of you that you've hidden away, the ones you've rejected or pushed aside, and learning to welcome them back. It's about looking at the parts of you that feel shameful or disconnected and saying, I understand why you're here, and I accept you. Alice's journey is full of moments where she tries to make sense of the chaotic world around her and of her own changing self. She struggles with identity and sighs. She questions who she is, but she doesn't reject the strange versions of herself she encounters. In fact, she eventually learns to navigate through Wonderland by embracing its madness and her own ever-shifting nature. This mirrors our own healing journey. We too can feel as though we're constantly shifting, changing sizes or perspectives, never quite sure where we belong. But like Alice, we can learn to accept each of these shifting pieces. It's not about discarding the too muchness of us or the not enough of us. It's about accepting them as part of our journey, learning from them, and finding balance within them. One of the pivotal moments of Alice's journey is when she takes responsibility for navigating her way through Wonderland. She's no longer trying to fit into anyone else's expectations. When we begin to integrate the parts of ourselves, we stop trying to hide or conform to someone else's area of who we should be. Instead, we step into our full, authentic selves, accepting each fragment for what it is, and using those pieces to create a more complex version of who we are. Healing is a process of embracing what we once feared and rejected. We too can begin to accept and integrate the many sides of ourselves. The goal isn't perfection, it's acceptance. It's allowing the fractured pieces of us to come together and become the person we were always meant to be. And so as you listen today, I encourage you to look at your own pieces, the ones that you've hidden, the ones that make you feel fragmented or uncertain, and ask yourself, how can you begin to welcome them back? How can you start integrating those parts of you into the person you are becoming? The healing journey doesn't mean fixing what's broken. It means embracing everything you are and learning to live fully as yourself and all of your beautiful complexity. You have the ability to navigate your own Wonderland, finding balance between all the different versions of yourself, and ultimately, learning to live in harmony with who you truly are. You can begin integrating your pieces by acknowledging and identifying the different parts of yourself, by starting to ask, what parts of me feel disconnected? What pieces of myself have I tried to hide or ignore? Write about each part of yourself, giving them names if it helps. For example, the protector, the rebel, the healer. Learn to listen to these parts. Sit with each part of yourself and try to understand its message. What does this part want or need? What does it fear? What does it want you to know? Journaling and meditation can help you tune into these parts and learn to listen to their inner wisdom. Practice self-compassion. This one was hard for me. Be kind to yourself when you uncover difficult parts of your identity. These pieces didn't appear by accident. They were your survival mechanisms. It's time to acknowledge them with love and acceptance. Think about how you would treat a friend who came to you with these struggles. Now treat yourself with that same kindness. The more I've embraced the different versions of myself, the more I've realized just how much beauty there is in complexity. I can be gentle and fierce. I can be logical and deeply emotional. I can be introverted and in some spaces and extroverted in others. I'm all of these things, and none of them fully define me. It's almost like stepping into Wonderland itself, where everything is ever-shifting and fantastical, but also so deeply real in its own way. Alice's experiences constantly challenge her to embrace the strange and unknown. She learns to navigate the chaos of Wonderland by allowing herself to be all of these versions, to accept the contradictions that made her who she is. We have the ability to be many things at once, and none of them fully define who we are. This isn't about being contradictory. It's about being fully human. It's about embracing that we are complex beings with layers, each of them valuable and necessary. And it's when we embrace our complexity that we can truly start living in alignment with who we are meant to be. What I found, and what I think is truly freeing, is that I no longer need to choose one part of myself over the other. I don't need to fit neatly into a single box anymore. I don't have to pretend to be one thing for one person and something else for another. I can simply be me in all of my forms, and that's enough. The Queen of Hearts might be shouting orders one moment, but the next, she's at the mercy of her own rules. The Cheshire Cat offers cryptic advice, never truly explaining, but always suggesting new possibilities. All of these characters are parts of a larger, complex, and ever-changing world. And just like Alice, we can learn to find peace and even joy in the fluidity of who we are. So what does it look like to embrace your complexity? It means accepting that you are not a one-dimensional person. You are an ever-evolving, multifaceted individual who contains multitudes. Your emotions, your actions, your dreams. They don't need to align with everyone else's idea of who you should be. In fact, they won't. The beauty of being whole is understanding that you are made up of all of these pieces that work together, even when they seem to contradict each other. Like Alice's journey, we're constantly shifting, but rather than trying to fit into predefined molds, we can embrace the fluidity of our identities and live authentically in each moment. And that's the most freeing part. I no longer need to hide pieces of who I am. Every part of me is worthy of being seen and loved. The quiet moments of reflection, the loudest bursts of laughter, the intense focus, and the random bursts of creativity. All of these are parts of me, and they all fit together in the beautiful, messy, and ever-changing puzzle that's me. So as you reflect on your own complexity today, I invite you to think about the pieces you've been hiding or trying to hide. What parts of yourself have you tucked away because you thought they weren't good enough, or because they didn't fit the image you had of who you should be? The beauty of being whole is not about being perfect or fitting into a singular box. It's about embracing the contradictions, the diversity of experiences, and the fluidity of who we are. Just like Alice, you are part of a wonderland of your own, full of complex, intricate, and unique aspects that all come together to form the whole of who you are. And that, my friend, is the truest kind of freedom. Living authentically, embracing every side of yourself, and knowing that you are enough, just as you are. Some steps that you can celebrate your complexity is that you can accept that you can be both and not either, or allow yourself to hold multiple identities without having to pick a singular one. You can be strong and sensitive, passionate and detached. These contradictions make you whole. Express your authentic self in different spaces. Find environments and people who allow you to show up as your full self, where you don't feel the need to perform or hide certain parts of who you are. Keep growing. Embrace the journey of discovery. As we evolve, we often discover new aspects of ourselves. Continue exploring, expanding, and integrating these new sides into the whole of who you are. I spent years trying to find the real me, only to realize I was never missing. I was just scattered. And the moment I stopped trying to fit myself into one box, the moment I stopped apologizing for my contradiction, that's when I finally started to feel whole. So, if you feel like you're made of broken pieces, know that you're not broken. You are layered, and every single piece of you deserves to exist.